The Last Stand on Kepler 442b. The crimson sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the jagged canyon walls as Marcus Chen adjusted his rifle scope for the 100th time that day. 3 weeks had passed since the Zephyrian Empire's invasion fleet had descended upon the human colony of New Geneva, and 3 weeks since every other member of his battalion had either evacuated or fallen in combat. Every other member except Marcus. The young sniper had volunteered to stay behind, to buy time for the civilian transports fleeing the planet. What he hadn't expected was to become the single most wanted target in the entire star system. The Zephyrians, a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous armor plating covering their blue-gray skin, had never encountered resistance quite like this. Marcus pressed his eye to the scope and surveyed the valley below. The alien encampment stretched for miles, their sleek silver structures gleaming in the alien sunlight. Somewhere in those command tents, he knew the Zephyrian generals were planning their next move. They had to be frustrated by now. A single human had been picking off their scouts, sabotaging their supply lines, and generally making their occupation of this sector a nightmare. The communication device beside him crackled to life. Marcus had jury-rigged it to intercept Zephyrian transmissions weeks ago, and what he heard made his blood run cold. General Vextar to all battalion commanders. The mechanical translation rendered the alien speech into flat, emotionless English. The human pest continues to evade capture. High Command has authorized deployment of the 6th Assault Legion. 6,000 of our finest warriors will converge on Grid Sector 77 Alpha at dawn. We will crush this insect once and for all. Marcus felt his stomach drop. 6,000 soldiers. The largest deployment he'd seen during the entire invasion had been maybe 300 Zephyrians at once. They were bringing enough firepower to level a small city just to deal with him. He should run. Any sane person would run. The smart play was to slip away under cover of darkness and try to reach the emergency extraction point 200 kilometers north. But Marcus Chen had stopped being concerned with the smart play 3 weeks ago. He thought about the families he'd watched board the evacuation ships. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the colony's school, had pressed a photo of her students into his hands before departing. "Bring them home safe," she'd whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. Little did she know that most of those children's parents were already dead, cut down in the first wave of the invasion. Then there was Dr. Rodriguez, the colony's chief medical officer, who had refused to leave until every wounded soldier had been evacuated. Marcus had carried the doctor's unconscious body to the transport himself after Rodriguez collapsed from exhaustion. The man had worked for 72 hours straight, saving lives with hands that shook from stimulant withdrawal. These people deserved better than to have their home trampled under alien boots. They deserved to know that someone had stood up to the monsters, even if that someone was just a 24-year-old sniper from the slums of Earth. Marcus began breaking down his current position methodically. The Zephyrians would expect him to run, to try and escape their encirclement. Instead, he was going to give them exactly what they wanted: a fight. But it would be on his terms, in terrain of his choosing. The canyon system where he'd made his stand was a labyrinth of narrow passages, hidden caves, and precarious ledges. Marcus had spent the last 3 weeks mapping every inch of it, setting up supply caches, emergency positions, and escape routes. More importantly, he'd been modifying the landscape itself. Mining charges salvaged from the colony's mineral extraction operation now waited at strategic choke points throughout the canyon. Tripwires connected to improvised explosive devices created deadly surprises for anyone foolish enough to pursue him through the narrower passages. And in the deepest part of the canyon, where ancient water had carved a natural amphitheater from the rock, Marcus had prepared his final gambit. As the alien sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus made his way to the canyon's highest peak. From here, he could see the Zephyrian encampment in all its imposing glory. Thousands of warriors moved with military precision, their weapons glinting in the light of their portable illumination systems. Massive hover tanks patrolled the perimeter, while aerial drones swept the surrounding area in search patterns. Tomorrow, all of that overwhelming force would be focused on hunting him down. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, Marcus felt a strange calm settling over his mind. He'd made peace with his decision days ago. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about sending a message. The Zephyrian Empire controlled dozens of star systems, commanded fleets that could glass entire worlds, and ruled over billions of subjugated beings, but they'd never faced anything quite like humanity's stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Marcus intended to make sure they remembered this lesson for generations to come. He settled into his sleeping bag and closed his eyes, knowing it might be the last peaceful sleep he'd ever get. Tomorrow would bring the largest military operation in the planet's history, all focused on eliminating one human sniper who'd had the audacity to stand his ground. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that Marcus Chen represented something far more dangerous than a single soldier with a rifle. He represented an idea that would spread like wildfire throughout their empire, that humans don't break, no matter how impossible the odds. In the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus woke to the sound of approaching aircraft. The hunt was about to begin. The dance of death. The first Zephyrian dropships touched down just as the crimson sun crested the canyon walls. Marcus watched through his scope as thousands of alien warriors poured out of their transports like angry insects from a disturbed hive. Their blue-gray armor gleamed in the morning light, and their weapons hummed with barely contained energy. This was the 6th Assault Legion, the Zephyrian Empire's elite shock troops, veterans of 100 conquered worlds. General Vextar himself led the initial deployment, his scarred carapace marking him as a warrior who had survived countless battles. The towering alien commander stood nearly 9 feet tall, his forearms moving in practiced coordination as he directed his forces into position. Through the intercepted communications, Marcus heard the general's tactical assessment. Spread formation Delta 7 across the canyon rim. Deploy seismic sensors at 50-meter intervals. The human cannot hide from our technology. Begin systematic sweep from the eastern approach and drive the pest toward the killing field. Marcus smiled grimly. The Zephyrians were fighting the last war, using overwhelming force and advanced technology to crush conventional resistance. They expected him to behave like every other enemy they'd faced, to panic, to make mistakes, to eventually break under the pressure of superior numbers. They were about to learn that humans wrote their own rules. The first probe team entered the canyon an hour after sunrise. 20 Zephyrian warriors in full combat armor, moving in perfect formation with overlapping fields of fire. Their energy weapons could punch through tank armor, and their personal shields could deflect small arms fire indefinitely. Against a conventional opponent, they would have been unstoppable. Marcus let them advance 300 meters into the canyon before taking his first shot. The modified rail rifle he'd constructed from salvaged mining equipment barely made a sound as it fired. The hypervelocity tungsten penetrator struck the lead Zephyrian center mass, punching through personal shields, armor plating, and internal organs before embedding itself in the canyon wall behind the target. The alien warrior simply ceased to exist from the waist up. Before the patrol could react, Marcus had shifted position, using the network of hidden passages he'd carved over the previous weeks. His second shot came from a completely different angle, dropping another Zephyrian before vanishing again into the maze of stone. The surviving aliens opened fire on empty air, their energy weapons turning sections of canyon wall into molten glass. Their targeting systems showed no heat signatures, no movement, no trace of their attacker. It was as if the canyon itself had turned hostile. General Vextar's voice crackled over the communications channel, tinged with frustration. Pattern recognition indicates coordinated ambush tactics. Deploy thermal imaging arrays and seismic scanners. Flush the human from his hiding places. But Marcus had anticipated their technology. The thermal dampening suit he wore, salvaged from the colony's environmental systems, rendered him invisible to heat sensors. The soft-soled boots he'd crafted from local materials left no vibration signature on the stone, and the network of false heat sources and audio decoys he'd planted throughout the canyon would keep their scanners chasing ghosts for hours. The second probe failed even more spectacularly than the first. Marcus had channeled them into a narrow passage where he'd placed improvised explosive devices created from mining charges. The blast brought down half a ton of canyon wall, burying 12 Zephyrian warriors in rubble and blocking one of the main approaches entirely. By midday, the aliens had lost over 60 soldiers without ever seeing their target. General Vextar's tactical briefings had devolved into increasingly desperate orders. "Bring up the heavy artillery. I want every square meter of that canyon turned to glass." "Sir, our seismic readings indicate extensive cave systems throughout the target zone. The human could be anywhere within a cubic kilometer of underground passages." "Then we level the entire area. Bring up the orbital bombardment coordinates." Marcus grinned as he listened to the alien command structure beginning to fracture. They were making the classic mistake of escalating firepower when they needed to escalate intelligence. Every weapon they brought to bear was designed for open warfare against conventional forces. None of it was optimized for hunting a single target in close terrain. The afternoon brought waves of Zephyrian assault troops, each wave larger and more aggressive than the last. Marcus picked them apart with surgical precision, using the canyon's geography to turn their superior numbers into a liability. In the narrow passages, they could only approach in single file, making themselves perfect targets. In the wider areas, he used ricochet shots and explosive traps to thin their ranks before melting away into passages too narrow for their bulky armor. The psychological effect was devastating. These were warriors who had conquered star systems, who had never known defeat. Now they were being hunted like prey animals by a single human who seemed to materialize from solid rock, strike without warning, and vanish again before they could respond. Some of the younger Zephyrian soldiers began to whisper that they were fighting a ghost, a spirit of the dead come back for vengeance. The older veterans scoffed at such superstition, but even they couldn't explain how one human could be in 3 places at once, or how he could predict their movements with supernatural accuracy. What they didn't understand was that Marcus wasn't just fighting with superior tactics and preparation. He was fighting with something the Zephyrian Empire had forgotten during its centuries of easy conquest, the fury of someone defending their home. Every shot he fired was for the colonists who had trusted him to buy them time. Every trap he triggered was for the children who would never see their parents again. Every moment he delayed their advance was another minute for the evacuation ships to reach safety. As the sun began to set on the first day of the hunt, General Vextar surveyed the casualty reports with growing disbelief. 237 dead, dozens more wounded, equipment losses mounting into the millions of credits, all inflicted by a single human sniper who had yet to make a single tactical error. The general's mandibles clicked in agitation as he opened a priority channel to the fleet command. "Request immediate reinforcement. Deploy the 2nd and 5th Assault Legions. Authorization code Omega-7. The response came back within minutes. "Reinforcements approved. Additional forces en route. Do not allow this human to escape." "General, the Empire's reputation depends on it." Marcus intercepted the transmission from his hidden position deep within the canyon's heart. 15,000 more soldiers were coming. The Zephyrians were committing nearly a quarter of their invasion force to hunting him down. Perfect. Every soldier focused on him was one fewer threatening human colonies elsewhere in the system. He checked his remaining ammunition supplies and smiled coldly. Tomorrow would bring even greater challenges, but tonight, he had work to do. Under cover of darkness, Marcus began repositioning his remaining explosive charges and setting up new ambush points. The Zephyrians thought they had him trapped in the canyon, but they had it backwards. They were the ones who were trapped, committed to a course of action that could only end one way. The only question was how many of them Marcus could take with him before the inevitable conclusion. As alien searchlights began sweeping the canyon walls, Marcus disappeared deeper into the labyrinth of stone and shadow, ready for the second day of the hunt. The legend born, the second day dawned with the thunder of engines as 3 more assault legions descended from orbit. 15,000 Zephyrian warriors now surrounded the canyon system, their dropships blackening the sky like mechanical locusts. General Vextar had called in every favor, pulled every string, and committed resources that would normally be reserved for planetary invasions, all to eliminate one human sniper. Marcus watched the deployment from his hidden observation post, a natural cave system that honeycombed through the canyon's deepest sections. The scale of the operation should have been overwhelming. Instead, he felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. The Zephyrians were proving his point more effectively than any propaganda broadcast could have managed. The alien empire that had conquered dozens of star systems, that ruled over billions of subjugated beings, that commanded fleets capable of reducing worlds to ash, was now dedicating a significant portion of its military might to hunting down one human soldier who refused to surrender. The irony was not lost on Marcus. In their desperation to crush the symbol of human resistance, the Zephyrians were creating a legend that would outlive them all. The renewed assault began at dawn with a systematic bombardment of the canyon's upper levels. Energy weapons capable of melting through starship armor turned ancient stone formations into rivers of molten rock. The Zephyrians had abandoned any pretense of subtlety, choosing instead to simply eliminate every possible hiding place through overwhelming firepower. Marcus had anticipated this escalation. During the night, he'd retreated to the deepest sections of the cave system, areas where the rock was too thick for even their heaviest weapons to penetrate. More importantly, he'd spent the dark hours implementing the final phase of his plan. The first indication that something had gone wrong came when the lead assault teams reached the canyon floor. Their advanced scouts triggered the seismic charges Marcus had placed at key structural points throughout the canyon system. The explosions weren't designed to kill, though they certainly accomplished that. They were designed to reshape the battlefield itself. Millions of tons of carefully weakened stone cascaded down the canyon walls, creating an avalanche that blocked major passages and channeled the Zephyrian advance into predetermined killing zones. The aliens found themselves funneled into narrow corridors where their superior numbers became a liability, where their heavy weapons couldn't be brought to bear effectively. Marcus had turned the entire canyon into a weapon. From his concealed positions, he began the deadliest game of cat and mouse in galactic history. The rail rifle sang its silent song of death as Zephyrian soldiers fell in perfectly timed ambushes. Marcus would fire once, maybe twice, then vanish into passages that seemed too small to accommodate a human body, let alone a fully equipped soldier. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical casualties. Zephyrian veterans who had never known fear found themselves jumping at shadows, firing at phantom contacts, turning their weapons on anything that moved. The constant threat of death from an unseen enemy began to fracture their disciplined formations. General Vextar tried everything. He deployed seismic scanners, thermal imaging arrays, atmospheric processors designed to flush out hidden enemies with toxic gas. Nothing worked. The humans seemed to exist outside the normal laws of physics, materializing from solid stone, striking without warning, then disappearing again before anyone could respond. What the aliens didn't understand was that Marcus had spent 3 weeks becoming part of the canyon itself. He knew every passage, every cave, every crack in the stone large enough to hide a human body. More importantly, he'd modified the cave system itself, carving new passages, creating false walls, establishing a three-dimensional maze that existed in no Zephyrian database. The third day brought desperation. Casualty reports showed nearly 800 dead, with hundreds more wounded or suffering from combat stress disorders. The Zephyrian Empire's most elite warriors were being systematically destroyed by a single human who fought like a force of nature. Emperor Kethvar himself transmitted from the flagship, his translated voice heavy with barely controlled rage. General Vextar, you will explain to me how 15,000 of my finest warriors have failed to eliminate one primitive human. The general's response came through gritted mandibles. The human fight's unlike anything we have encountered, my emperor. He has turned the entire battlefield into his weapon. Our tactical algorithms cannot predict his movements because he operates outside all known parameters of warfare. Then you will adapt. Use chemical weapons, biological agents, whatever is necessary. I will not have the Empire's reputation tarnished by this embarrassment. But Marcus had heard enough. As the Zephyrians prepared their final, desperate assault using weapons banned by galactic convention, he initiated the last phase of his defense. Deep beneath the canyon, in caves that predated the human colonization of the planet, Marcus had discovered something the geological surveys had missed: a massive underground gas pocket connected to the planet's volcanic activity. The mining charges he'd been saving, originally intended to seal cave entrances, now served a very different purpose. Marcus had spent days calculating the precise placement needed to rupture the gas pocket while creating a controlled release that wouldn't destroy the entire canyon system. He needed to survive long enough to see the results. The explosion, when it came, redefined the meaning of the word catastrophic. A geyser of superheated gas erupted from dozens of points throughout the canyon, turning the entire area into a furnace that vaporized everything within a 2-kilometer radius. The Zephyrian assault force, caught in their concentrated formation, simply ceased to exist. 15,000 elite warriors, the pride of the 6th, 2nd, and 5th Assault Legions, eliminated in a matter of seconds. The cream of the Zephyrian military, veterans of 100 campaigns, reduced to scattered atoms by a trap set by one human sniper. Marcus survived the blast in the deepest cave system, protected by nearly 100 meters of solid rock. When the fires finally died and the gas began to clear, he emerged into a transformed landscape. The canyon that had been his home for 3 weeks was gone, replaced by a glass-lined crater that glowed with residual heat. General Vexitar's command ship, hovering safely above the devastation, transmitted a single message on all frequencies. Impossible. This is impossible. But Marcus wasn't finished. Using the communication array he'd built from salvaged equipment, he broadcast on the frequency he knew the Zephyrian fleet was monitoring. This is Sergeant Marcus Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You came here with 15,000 soldiers to eliminate one sniper. Now you have 15,000 reasons to remember what happens when you threaten human civilians. This is what we call a proportional response. The transmission that followed from the Zephyrian flagship was barely coherent, a mixture of rage and disbelief. Emperor Kethvar himself had taken personal command of the operation, and his translated words crackled with fury. You think this changes anything, human? You think this single victory matters? We have fleets that can reduce your entire species to ash. Marcus smiled as he keyed the transmitter one final time. Then you'd better bring more than 6,000 soldiers next time. The aftermath of what became known as the Kepler Canyon incident sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire, for the first time in its 1,000-year history, had suffered a defeat so complete, so utterly devastating, that it defied military explanation. A single human had eliminated an entire assault force using nothing but preparation, determination, and an intimate knowledge of the battlefield. More importantly, the human evacuation ships had safely reached the outer system, carrying with them the recorded transmissions of Marcus Chen's last stand. Within weeks, the story had spread to every human colony in known space. Within months, it had reached the subjugated worlds of the Zephyrian Empire itself. Resistance movements that had been dormant for generations suddenly found new inspiration. If one human could hold off 15,000 Zephyrian warriors, what could entire populations accomplish if they fought back? Rebellions flared across dozens of star systems as conquered races remembered that oppressors, no matter how powerful, could be defeated by those willing to pay the ultimate price. Marcus Chen became a legend, a symbol of human defiance that would endure long after the last Zephyrian warship had been driven from human space. The sniper who had volunteered to buy time for evacuating civilians had instead bought something far more valuable: hope. The Zephyrian Empire would never recover from the psychological blow dealt at Kepler Canyon. Their reputation for invincibility was shattered, their warrior culture left questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare and courage. Within a decade, their empire would begin to crumble as subject worlds declared independence, and even their own military began to fracture. All because one human sniper had decided that some things were worth dying for, and that the best way to honor that sacrifice was to make the enemy pay such a terrible price that they would never forget the lesson. The galaxy had learned something new about humanity that day. We don't just fight to win. We fight to teach our enemies that threatening us comes with consequences so severe, so disproportionate, that the very memory serves as deterrent for generations to come. Marcus Chen had given his life to save a few thousand civilians. In doing so, he had saved billions more by proving that humans don't break, no matter the odds. We adapt, we endure, and when pushed to the brink, we show the universe exactly why our species had earned the right to walk among the stars.